And welcome back. This is Microsoft Virtual Academy. We're getting started with Template 10, and we're talking about some of the view services that you're going to include inside your template or inside your application. And specifically, in this session, we'll be talking about two services, a settings service that you'll be including, as well as potentially the logging service for seeing the kind of the deep interactions of Template 10.
Yeah, the login service is there, just whether they're using it or not.
That's right. Now, to be very, very clear, Template 10 doesn't ship a settings service for you. We're just expecting that every developer is going to create a settings service as a base implementation for every application. If you use the minimal or the hamburger button template, it ships with a kind of a skeleton settings service for you to be able to use. And the reason you're creating your own and we're not shipping one or giving one to you is because the settings for your application are unique to your application. The one I would create for my application would have a handful of settings. Yours would have a handful. They may overlap a little, but they would be different because the apps are different. However, the logic that you use to implement your service and to read and write from the application namespace, the app data namespace, is just redundant code, right? You're going to write and read from that. You're going to cast and check and all of these other things. Wouldn't it be nice if all of that was wrapped in a reusable helper? And so even though we're talking about the settings service, what we're really talking about is the settings helper that you'll use in the service.
Yeah, facilitates the creation of your own settings service, basically. And so we've got a number of methods that are really useful to have. We can check to see whether a value exists. We have the ability to read and write strongly typed values. And of course, the read provides a lot of extra framework stuff to really make it useful in a real app.
And we've said this many times, and it's true here too, that what we're doing in Template 10 is what you could do as well. We're not splitting the atom in a way that is unique only to us. This just is that code that we would all write over and over again, and we've already tested it, implemented it for you, and crowdsourced the testing to our large community of Template 10 users, the thousands and thousands of developers who are using it today, and hopefully the thousands and thousands who will be adding on to that tomorrow, hopefully watching this course right now. So are you going to create a settings service? We assume you will. How can we make that easier with the settings helper? And so we have a quick little implementation sample here. This slide shows kind of a basic of how you would implement a settings service of your own. Inside the constructor, you would new up the helper that you're going to use in your getter and setter properties. So you can see here in the getter and the setter that instead of reading or writing, say, from a field or anything else, you're using the helper to do the read. You're using the helper to do the write. And in this case, the helper is reading a value where you're passing in a key for it to find, but you're also passing in an otherwise, or if this fails, doesn't cast properly, or isn't found, then return. In this case, it's true that it's going to return back. So you'd use that as a default value for settings that your user maybe hasn't gotten around to setting in a custom way yet.
Absolutely. One thing we'd like to point out, though, is the fact that helper is being stored as an iSettings helper. So we've defined an interface that the baseline settings helper implements. But the reason for this is to support dependency injection, to be able to allow you to create a mock data version of settings helper. So you're not reliant upon actually setting up data inside application data in order to support unit testing and those kind of capabilities.
If you're not using dependency injection, or you're not using mock data or anything sophisticated like that, then you might look at this and wonder why we're using an interface. Now you know why. It certainly doesn't change the way that you would implement it. You get to use it the same. Okay, so let me pull up Visual Studio. I think it'd be neat to see maybe how it's implemented in the minimal and what just to look for. So when I'm implementing my own. All right, so I have Visual Studio up right now, and let's see. I'm going to pull up and show you a handful of things here. I'm going to open my Views and View Models folder so I can select 3 files. I have the view, which is the settings page, and that is the UI. So let me just pull it up real quick. That's the UI that I have to present to the user to be able to customize whatever the settings are inside the app. Now remember, your application will likely have many hidden settings as well, keys to your API calls and things like that.
Yeah, so you're using a map control. You need to have a Bing Map API key.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You want to store that somewhere, and you're passing this settings service to all of your view models, and so all of your view models access it. But for the ones that are for the user, you would expose it perhaps with a settings page like this that's shipped automatically with the minimal project, and then it would have the associated settings page view model, which inside it would have a reference like right here to the settings service, and from that point forward, whenever it interacts with it, it uses the settings service to do it. So how does the view model know how to save and read settings, it uses the settings service. So let's look at the settings service. The settings service is here. It's implemented exactly like the code snippet we just showed on the slide.
Strange enough.
So here inside the constructor is where we new up the settings helper, which of course is that interface that you pointed out. And then here's that use back button, and you'll notice it's slightly different than the slide in that it is still reading and writing using the helper, but in the setter we're actually doing the application. So whatever in this case, it's whether or not to use the back button, so we swap in and out between.
And we're also leveraging the dispatcher, which we discussed in a previous session.
That's right. And so in this case, the dispatcher is making sure that when we make the changes in the setting, that it's made on the proper UI thread. Honestly, and probably most implementations of minimal, this isn't necessary. This is just defensive programming. Yeah. And a nice little model for you to be able to copy for yourself as well. All right, so that's really the settings service. And when we say settings service, we're meaning that thing that every application is likely to have. And what we provide to you through Template 10 is not a settings service, but it is a setting helper that does the reading and writing into the application data namespace, which is already there, which is where you put settings anyway in UWP app. We just wrap it so that all the logic you would write anyway is implemented there and easy to use. Pretty nice.
Sounds good. Why don't we talk about the logging service?
All right, so let's transition to a new service. This is the logging service. And if the settings service is something you'd see in every application, the logging service is something you'd see in just a few applications. And so it's very, very useful. If you already have logging, you can tie this into your existing logging framework. If you don't have logging, you can leverage this for your own logging service as well. But in addition, if you're wanting to see the interactions inside Template 10 and you're wondering, are things happening in the order that I really think they are? Are things happening twice the way they're not supposed to be? All those sorts of questions can be answered by this logging service as well. The implementation of the logging service, when Template 10 does not log automatically, you must provide a logging delegate for it to write. And so let me show you kind of what that means. So swap back over just for a second to my Visual Studio. I'm going to go into AppXAML where I've implemented the basic part of it. And so I have a method here called log. And in this case, I've made it as simple as possible. It only writes to the debug output window. So that's down here, right? It writes right there. And so what we do is when it writes out one of all or more of the 4 things passed to it by the logging service. So in this case, a custom text that's passed, the severity, and so everything that's written by Template 10 has a severity level of Template 10. This allows me to filter out all the Template 10 tracing if I don't want to have it in my logs. Also, the target, and so this is the item that's about to be acted upon, as well as the caller. And so we can use, in this case, the caller is the method that's being called from, right? So I might have some sort of logging logic at the top of a method. In fact, if you look through the source code of Template 10, at the top of almost every method is this write log, or I think it's called debug write in this case. And all of them execute into the logging service and are ignored until you implement this. And so this is the log, and you're wondering maybe how in the world will I know this signature? Well, one, you could take a screen capture right now.
Too late.
Okay, or 2, you could realize that signature is actually part of the debug write delegate. And so in this case, I say logging service dot write line, which is actually just a that is actually the delegate that's going to be invoked. So if that's null, then it won't run. And so it's null by default in production because it's release mode. And so in this case, I'm saying, well, make this a new delegate. Specifically, it's going to be this log right here. And so let me go into my output window and clear it. And I want to show you not logging and logging. So let me go ahead and run my application. And so this will be all of the default information that's put into the output window by my app, not by Template 10. Right? So I'll go into my app, I'll submit and close. And when I go into the output window, there's a lot of information here. None of it really useful, right? The loading of modules, the closing of threads, and things like that.
So actually, you can clear out a lot of those things by right-clicking in there and changing some of the default settings. A lot of people actually don't know that's there.
Yeah, it's useful because a lot of those are just not useful at all. So I could say module load, not interested. Module unload, still not very interested. Let's see, maybe process and thread X. Well, I'll say thread for sure, not interested in that. But I don't want to undo program output. That's what's the custom stuff that I'm about to write.
And you probably want to see exception messages and so on.
Yeah, yeah, that's
that
right.
seems useful.
You know what's really useful here is this is also where binding errors will sometimes bubble up. So it's nice to have that here. Okay, so just noticing this is what we have without logging, and I'm going to clear this out, and I'm going to set it so now logging is enabled by setting this action to this delegate, or setting this delegate to this method right here. So I'll go ahead and run it again. And so now every single method, not every single, but pretty close to every single method, even sub-logic to be honest, inside template 10 is going to be executed. And I'll close this out, stop it. I don't have to stop it, obviously, you'll look at output window, but I am in this case. And I want you just to start seeing the structure of everything that's passed to you. And so each has a timestamp. That's because I put that in the output, right? It's right here, the little timestamp that I put, as well as severity. So they all should say template 10, the caller, and then the text. And so you'll be able to see custom text around it as well. And so we go bootstrapper.onWindowCreated. That's where it all begins before anything happens. And then we go to the loaded event inside Bootstrapper, and then the dispatcher is created. Of course, the window wrapper was already created. The dispatcher is created inside that. Internal launch, initialize frame async. Well, none of these are public yet, right? So these are all the work that's being done inside. And then we create the root frame, create the initial navigation service. Remember, this is just a vanilla implementation. Create the navigation service, and then all of a sudden, we call start async for the first time.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, this is the first time we've actually got to your information. And then we do our initial navigation, and we can see both where we're navigating to, in this case it's to the page, and what we're passing to it. So you can see it's to the comma here. We're not passing anything. It's empty. And then we start the operation of navigation. And so all of these things are actually happening inside navigation. And so we start by serializing what's in there. We do the frame facade navigation inside it. We handle whether or not it's canceled. We deserialize the value, and we move on from there. Anyway, I don't want to step through all of it, but it's really a great way to be able to kind of see inside template 10 and understand what's going on. And so that's the logging service. Earlier, we were talking about the settings service. Absolutely, we expect that most applications are going to have a settings service that are leveraging the settings helper to make life easy if you want it. And then the logging service, if there's just some stuff going on and you want to figure it out, or you want to wrap in your own, you don't have to do a debug.write line. You could do a mylogservice.write, and it actually writes to a file or a web service.
Or you could be using Hockey app or Application Insights and writing things out through those frameworks as well.
That's right. And so this is ready to write all this information out, but it doesn't until you enable it. There you go. This is maybe an edge case. Maybe not. It'd be cool if
but it's been very useful for us.
It's been very useful for us to figure things out. That's absolutely true. It's easy, something as sophisticated as template 10, it's easy to forget some of the subtle inner workings. This helps remind us, and it's nice. So there you go. That is the settings service, and it was the logging service. Good luck.